Gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, the ranking member of our Capital Markets Subcommittee, recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to start by associating myself with the ranking member's comments. The potential for corruption is the actuality of corruption was well explained. I want to point out here that so far we've seen Silicon Valley Bank go down because it wasn't forced to market its securities, which had declined in value. And bank regulators had to have this attitude that those bonds were worth what you paid for them, which was more than you could sell them for. Bank regulators haven't solved this problem. We'll wait for another Silicon Valley Bank and another disaster and see how we react to that one. Operation Choke Point is something that I think has been rejected by some of us on both sides of the aisle. It's one thing for a private individual to decide they want to boycott this or that entity, and the Supreme Court seems to think that even corporations have First Amendment rights. But when the government presses a bank not to provide transactions accounts to a legal business because that business is in coal or payday lending or is Planned Parenthood, that's when government is going way too far. Can I hear from each of the regulators that you are not telling the banks you regulate or the credit unions you regulate that they will be disfavored because they provide transactions accounts to businesses that are unpopular on the left, the right, or somewhere else? Let me just go down the list, Ms. Bowman. Can you assure us there's no choke point going on here?
It's very important that all Americans have access to financial services, especially if they're engaged in legal activities and if they are engaged in disfavored activities that should not disqualify them from banking services. So we're very cautious and reviewing our actions over the past few years to ensure that we were not engaged in those activities.
I believe if any of the other regulators disagree with that, let me know. Let me go on to the next question, which is for the credit unions, and that is we've got these credit union board members serving as volunteers. I raised the issue with your predecessor and got on the issue of why not allow them to get reimbursed for the child care costs that they incur to attend board meetings. And in July of 2024, I was told, in light of my question, you're going to consider the issue. How long is it going to take you to decide that the board members can get reimbursed for child care?
Congressman, I want to credit you for pressing that issue. You're correct. It's relatively uncontroversial. It's not an issue at banks or most for-profit because you can just pay the board members. As you said, they're volunteers, and it's a relatively small dollar thing.
I hope that you move forward in weeks instead of years on that, but I've got to go on to the next question. I'll ask unanimous consent to put into the record an article from the Business Insider, August 8th, 2025.
Without objection.
This article states that Mr. Palmer Luckey, in a fundraising memo to investors, claimed that his bank charter would be approved on a speedy timeline because of his political network and the bank's close ties to regulators. Now, this is an interesting situation because if the memo was lying, that is securities fraud. You can't go to prospective investors and say, we're going to be successful if you're making it up. On the other hand, if he was telling the truth, that is much worse, because it means that because he's part of what is described in the article as a $1 million program to give money to Republicans, he was going to get his bank charter approved much more quickly by the OCC. So I'll ask Mr. Gould, since I assume he didn't use political connections to get his bank charter approved more quickly, have you begun a securities fraud, or have you talked to the SEC about securities fraud when a man raises money for his bank by claiming that you're a corrupt organization?
Well, I'm not familiar with all the allegations made in that article, but I can assure you that the OCC treats any applicant or potential applicant. In
So
the
if
same-
somebody said they were going to get favorable treatment and put it in their offering memorandum, would that be securities fraud that you want to care about?
Again, Congressman, I'm not responsible for the securities laws, and I'm not familiar with that.
I would hope that you'd mail a letter to the SEC, and I will get you the article, which will be part of the record.
Gentlemen.